Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 14, which is all about the digestive system. This is a very long chapter, so I'll try to cut it into smaller chunks, which will hopefully allow you to digest the material a little bit easier. Get it? And for those of you who don't know who this is Wimpy. You should look him up. He's from Popeye, the cartoon. And so the digestive system, in this chapter, you're going to learn why we eat, why we get hungry, and what we eat. And then you're going to learn about what the process of digestion happens, like what's going on during the digestion of foods. So there are certain specific functions that the digestive system has. The first is taking in food, which is known as ingestion. Then we break the food down either through mechanical or through chemical digestion. We absorb the nutrients, and then we get rid of the waste products. And that absorption of nutrients is self-explanatory. Getting rid of the waste products is known as defecation. So we have two major groups of organs, which we will talk about. The first is part of the GI tract or alimentary canal. These organs start with the mouth and end in the anus. Food comes in through the mouth, moves back to the pharynx, then to the esophagus, to the stomach, to the small and then the large intestines, and then eventually to the anus and out of the body. But we also have multiple accessory organs which we need to help us to digest and absorb the foods. So our teeth and tongue, we have salivary glands, we have our pancreas and our liver, we have lacteals that help us in absorbing fats. So they're all important in this digestive tract. And so here you can see the structures of the digestive system. In the mouth, we have the tongue. You don't see teeth there, but we also have teeth. We have lots of different salivary glands that help us in breaking down foods and in producing a soft ball of food called a bolus that we can then push back into our pharynx and our esophagus. The esophagus is a long tube that runs to the stomach. Our stomach is kind of a holding sac for food where it gets churned up and turned into a liquid food called chyme. Between the stomach and the small intestines, we have a sphincter called the pyloric sphincter. The first part of the small intestines is known as the duodenum. The duodenum is just a tiny area that also has openings for the liver and bile, as well as, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas to secrete materials. So we get a lot of different secretions into that duodenum. The jejunum is the long region of the small intestines where we have the majority of absorption occurring. So we have chemical digestion and absorption of materials. The very end of the small intestines is known as the ileum, and this leads to an ileocecal valve. The cecum then is the first part of the large intestines. So the ileum leads to that cecum, and then food moves into the cecum. And in this region, we have mainly absorption of water, but we also have absorption of certain vitamins. At the tip of the cecum, we have the appendix. The appendix holds a lot of different bacteria that make up our gut flora. So if you have an illness that gets rid of a lot of the bacteria, the appendix can help to replenish the normal flora of the gut. It's one of the functions. The cecum leads into the ascending, transverse, and descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum. which is a holding area for fecal matter until we release it through our anus. And so I just talked about these, I showed you them, but the tube starts at the mouth, runs through the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestines, and then to the anus. We're going to look at each of these areas a little closer. And we'll talk about not only their structure, but also their functions. So the mouth, or the oral cavity, is lined by a mucous membrane. The tissue of the mouth is stratified squamous epithelium. It is mainly non-keratinized. Our lips are keratinized stratified squamous, but our cheeks are non-keratinized stratified squamous. Superior, we have a hard palate. The hard palate is composed of the maxilla and the palatine bone. Posterior, the hard palate, we have the soft palate. And the projection off of the soft palate is called the uvula. The uvula functions in moving upward to cover the nasal cavity when we swallow. The space between our lips and our teeth is known as the vestibule. The oral cavity then is the area contained by the teeth, so that large area when you open your mouth that has the tongue in it. And your tongue is a structure in the mouth that not only has sensory function, so it senses taste, it also functions in speech, and it helps us to manipulate food. We have tonsils that are found in the posterior aspect of the oral cavity. These are called the palatine tonsils. We also have tonsils at the base of the tongue, known as lingual tonsils. These are going to trap any potential pathogens that are trying to get in through the digestive route. And so you can see your tonsils here, you can see tonsils here. The tonsils are part of your lymphatic system, and so we have lymphocytes waiting in these lymphatic structures for any potential pathogens that are coming in, and they can start immediately waging a war against those pathogens. Here you can see the hard palate. In the back of the mouth we have a soft palate, and then we have the uvula sitting on the soft palate. So the major function of the mouth is to mechanically digest food. So we ingest, we take food in, and then we start to chew it up. Our tongue and the saliva help to mix the chewed up food and form what we call a food bolus. This is a soft ball of food. Once we have that food bolus, we then can push that food bolus to the back of our throat for swallowing. The pharynx is our second region of the GI tract. This is just a passageway for both food and liquids, as well as for air. So the pharynx is shared between our digestive and our respiratory system. The two structures that we focus on in the digestive system are the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx. So food gets propelled from the mouth into the pharynx, which you can see right here. And so here's your nasopharynx. We don't typically have food going up there. When food is moved from the mouth or the oral cavity, it comes out. This soft palate and uvula flip upwards. Food goes into the oropharynx, and then it goes down to through the laryngopharynx and into the esophagus. As the food comes down, it pushes this epiglottis closed. we have 2 layers of skeletal muscle in the pharynx that help to move food through peristaltic waves into our esophagus. So then let's look at the esophagus. The esophagus is a tube that runs from the pharynx into the stomach. So it goes right through the diaphragm. And it also moves food via peristaltic waves from the mouth to the stomach. So when you think of peristaltic waves, think about when you have a tube of toothpaste. And we all do this. We kind of squeeze the toothpaste in the middle instead of at one end or the other end at times. So when you have toothpaste and you have to get it from the bottom up because, you know, all the toothpaste is either at the bottom or it's gone, then those waves, that squeezing motion that's kind of moving it in one direction, those are kind of like what peristaltic waves would look like. And so again, this is a large picture of the entire anatomy of the mouth. And you can see that esophagus right here, which is going to lead into the stomach, okay? So when we look at the esophagus all the way through the stomach, small intestines, and large intestines, there are 4 major tissue layers. We have the mucosal layer, which is going to be composed predominantly of columnar epithelium. We have a submucosal layer, which has some smooth muscles in it, but has mainly, and has some nerves in it. Then we have the muscularis layer, which has between 2 and 3 layers of muscle, smooth muscle, and then the serosa. The serosa is the outer layer of epithelium. So innermost layer, again, like I said, it's predominantly simple columnar epithelium, but in the esophagus, we do have stratified squamous epithelium. So think about it. Stratified squamous epithelium functions in protection, specifically protection from any type of abrasion. And I'm pretty confident that every person that's listening to my lecture right now has probably swallowed a potato chip where it went down and it kind of scraped your throat and you were like, ow, ow, ow. If you only had a single layer of epithelium between the mucosal layer and the submucosa, then you would scrape right through and then you would start to bleed. That would be very dangerous. But because we have stratified squamous epithelium, we have a thick layer of tissue that can be more protective, and it's replaced. The inner layer has very little smooth muscle. Smooth muscle starts in the next layer. So the smooth or the submucosal layer does have some smooth muscle, but it also have a lot of it has a lot of blood vessels and nerves, which are important, so that those nerves help to control the swallowing and control movement of foods going through our digestive tract. The third layer then is the muscularis layer. Muscularis layer has either 2 or 3 layers, depending on where, of smooth muscle. So the majority has 2 layers, inner circular and outer longitudinal layer. And then the outermost region is the serosa, which consists of your visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum, so that serous membrane that surrounds all those organs in the abdominal and pelvic cavity. And so here you can see those layers. My dogs, I do. Apologies for that. Here you can see those layers again, okay? And here you can also see some of the serosa surrounding those organs. And you can also see fat, this greater omentum right there. So there are two major nerve plexes associated with the digestive tract. The first is known as the submucosal plexus, and the second is the myenteric plexus. Both help in regulating mobility and secretory activity of the GI tract. Hold on one moment. I want to see how many more slides before I finish this lecture portion. I'm going to finish this lecture talking about the stomach, and then we'll get into our second lecture with the small intestines. So our stomach is a C-shaped organ, and it's basically a holding container for food that has came into the body. It holds this food until our small intestines are ready to start digesting it and absorbing the nutrients. So while the food is in the stomach churns, and the gastric juice in the stomach is going to help to break the food down chemically further. So it started as a food bolus that left our mouth and went into our stomach. And by the time it enters the small intestines, it's going to be a liquid food called chyme. Sorry. So there are four basic regions to the stomach. The cardia, which I'll show you in a minute, is located near the heart, and that's where it gets its name. The fundus, which is a large expanded portion of the stomach, the body, and then the pylorus. So let's look at those structures. Here's the cardia. The esophagus brings food in, and there is a cardioesophageal sphincter right here that allows food to move into the stomach. And so this is the fundus. This is a large, like, dome-shaped structure. Then we have the body, which is the largest part of the stomach, and it ends in this tiny region down here called the pylorus. We also have a pyloric sphincter right here that allows food to leave the pylorus and enter the small intestines. I told you that there are 3 layers of smooth muscle at certain regions of the GI tract, and it's the stomach that I'm talking about. So you have an oblique layer, a circular layer, and a longitudinal layer of smooth muscle that allows for that churning. Within the stomach, we have these raised, or I guess, yeah, this like ruffled structure of the mucosal layer. Those ruffles are known as rugae, and they basically allow the stomach to expand and become larger. So think about that turkey dinner that you eat, or when you go for a really fancy meal and you overeat the food because it's so tasty. That food has to have somewhere to go, and your stomach can expand to take in more food to some extent. Obviously, you can't take in just any amounts of food. But these rugae allow for that expansion. The stomach can stretch, and it can hold a lot of food, depending, of course, if there was any surgeries done on the stomach, then it could potentially be less than normal. We have a lesser and a greater omentum. So the lesser omentum is a second layer of a peritoneum, and then the greater omentum is an extension of the peritoneum that contains fat that cushions and protects our abdominal organs. And so again, you can see that greater omentum here that surrounds all of our abdominal organs and just kind of protects those organs. Up here, you can see the stomach. The stomach is kind of covered or hugged by the liver over here and the spleen on this side. Here's just a diagram showing that peritoneal membrane. So stomach contains simple columnar epithelium. These simple columnar epithelium are found in pits called gastric pits. This is located within the mucus of the stomach. The mucus of the stomach is what keeps the epithelium protected from the acidic environment. The stomach gastric pits produce multiple chemicals that are necessary for digesting foods, but also they secrete intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is needed for vitamin B absorption. So without intrinsic factor, we wouldn't be able to absorb vitamin D properly. Without vitamin B, we can't produce red blood cells properly. And so there's a disease called pernicious anemia that is associated with lack of vitamin B. So the different cell structures of the stomach include chief cells, which produce pepsinogen, parietal cells, which produce hydrochloric acid, mucous neck cells that produce an acidic mucus, and enteroendocrine cells that produce gastrin. And I told you the function of the stomach is to store food and to break it down chemically into a liquid called chyme. So here are the different cell structures. You can see the, so these are gastric pits. And we have parietal cells, we have mucous neck cells, we have chief cells down here. All functioning in producing that gastric juice that is nice and acidic and that can help in the breakdown of materials in the stomach, specifically proteins and fats. Okay. This is just another diagram showing hydrochloric acid and pepsin. So pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down proteins, and hydrochloric acid activates pepsin. Without the activation of pepsin, pepsinogen is an inactive protein. Without being activated, then the proteins that are in the stomach, like from the foods you eat, are not going to be able to be broken down into the amino acids, which then can be absorbed. So we need that pepsin to help break down the food so that we can then start absorbing those nutrients. And so at this point, we have a lot of questions from the study guide. This has been a long lecture. What are the functions of the digestive system? What are the structures of the GI tract? What are the functions of the oral cavity, the pharynx, the esophagus, and the stomach? What are the folds of the stomach called? What cells produce hydrochloric acid? What cells produce pepsinogen? Something I didn't ask, what is the function of intrinsic factor? Those are all things that are great study guide questions that you should be able to answer. I'm going to stop this video because it's been almost 25 minutes, which is really long. And we'll get into the small intestines next. Bye.